50,000 people went silent, not over a winner, not over a broken record, but because of a brief exchange during a stoppage in play. 30 words, spoken softly, directed at a teenage ball girl from Germany standing at the edge of the court. A 19-year-old from Manila looked up at her and spoke in German. Not rehearsed phrases. Not a polite, memorized greeting. She spoke the way someone speaks when a language belongs to them. Natural, warm, effortless. And Berlin, a city that carries more weight in European tennis than perhaps any other, lost its composure entirely. People jumped to their feet. Strangers grabbed each other. A woman near the front pressed both hands to her mouth, looking like she'd just witnessed something almost too intimate to see in public. In the VIP section, Steffi Graf, the greatest German player the sport has ever produced, went completely still. That stillness matters. When a legend is stopped in her tracks by something she didn't expect, that silence speaks louder than any trophy presentation ever could. The name is Alex Eala. By the end of this, you'll understand why that name is going to define women's tennis for the next decade. Where it all began. To understand what happened in Berlin, you have to understand the person who made it happen. Manila, 2005. Alex Eala is born into a household where athletic excellence is an abstract. Her father, Michael, was a professional tennis player. When he watched his daughter on a court as a young girl, he didn't just see potential. He saw the kind of talent that demands to be taken seriously. So the family made a decision most families never would. They sent her to Spain. Not to a summer program. To the Rafa Nadal Academy in Manacor, arguably the most rigorous junior development environment on earth. A place where training sessions stretch across the entire day, not as an exception, but as the baseline expectation. Where homesickness is your problem to solve. Where the pressure either shapes you or breaks you. Eala was shaped. She won the Junior Australian Open in 2022. Then returned the same year and claimed the Junior US Open, becoming the first Filipino athlete in history to win a Grand Slam title at any level, junior or senior. First. Ever. And she did it without fanfare. No major backing, no promotional machinery, no wide public attention outside tennis circles. Just the titles, quietly earned. But here's what almost every tribute to those accomplishments tends to skip over. While the tennis world was tracking her results, something else was quietly taking shape, something that had nothing to do with her serve or her movement or her ability to stay composed in a third set. She was becoming someone truly at home in the world. What the Academy actually built, the Rafa Nadal Academy, doesn't operate in one language. Coaches shift languages mid-session. Players from across the globe share courts, meals, and exhausted evenings together. The environment demands more than physical adaptability. It demands social and cultural adaptability. Eala absorbed it all. Through her junior years, she moved across Europe, competing in German-speaking countries, spending genuine time in places where German wasn't a curiosity. It was simply how the people around her talked. No formal coursework. No assigned lessons. She listened. She paid attention. She met people where they were because that's apparently just the kind of person she is. Most touring professionals move through the world in a narrow tunnel, hotel, court, hotel, airport on repeat. They pass through cities without the cities ever passing through them. Eala moved differently. She let places in. By the time she arrived in Berlin, she wasn't arriving as a visitor. She was arriving as someone who had already, without announcement or credit, made herself at home in a language most people assumed would always be foreign to her. Berlin didn't know that yet. It was about to find out. What a changeover actually is. Casual fans underestimate the psychological texture of a changeover. From the outside, it looks like nothing. Players sit, wipe down, drink water, collect themselves, stand back up. 90 seconds. Ball kids orbit the court doing their jobs cleanly and invisibly. The crowd shifts. The atmosphere drops to a low hum. Nothing of consequence happens. That's the design. A changeover is a pause between moments that matter, which is precisely why what unfolded during this one in Berlin was so disorienting, so unexpected, and ultimately so completely overwhelming. Eala was deep in the second set of a tightly contested match. The crowd had been warm throughout, engaged, appreciative, but within the normal range of a professional atmosphere. Then a young German ball girl, perhaps 14 or 15, came to collect a towel from Eala's end of the court. Standard procedure. The kind of exchange that happens hundreds of times at every tournament, at every venue, every single week. Players rarely even register it. They're staring at their strings, running through the next game in their heads, waiting for their breathing to settle. Eala looked up, and instead of a distracted half-smile, instead of the polite non-acknowledgement that is the norm, she spoke to the girl. In German. Warm, colloquial, completely unlabored German. The ball kid's expression shifted in real time, the initial shock of being unexpectedly addressed dissolving almost immediately into pure, wide, unguarded joy. A grin spread across her face large enough to read from rows away. People in the front seats caught fragments of the exchange. They turned to the people beside them. Those people turned to those behind them. The realization of what was happening moved outward through the stadium in a wave, each section catching it a beat after the one in front. The applause didn't build. It erupted. Sudden and total, completely disconnected from the match, from any point won or lost. It was the sound of 50,000 people falling for someone all at once. Eala's reaction, caught clearly on camera, may be the most telling detail in this entire story. She looked around the stadium with an expression balanced precisely between genuine surprise and quiet amusement, as though it simply hadn't occurred to her that speaking naturally to a teenager would produce this. As though the whole thing had seemed completely obvious to her, and she was now mildly bewildered by the response to something she considered entirely unremarkable. That's what broke the crowd open completely. Because if it had been calculated, if it had been a media-trained athlete deploying warmth at a carefully chosen moment, anyone watching closely would have sensed the difference between performance and truth. People can feel the gap between something genuine and something manufactured, even when they lack the vocabulary to describe it. What that stadium felt in that moment was a person who had simply done what came naturally, and who was visibly, mildly puzzled that anyone found it remarkable. Within 4 minutes of play resuming, the clip was already spreading. Not through official broadcast channels, which were still focused on the match. Through personal accounts, fan pages, the informal network that sports culture has assembled to catch what formal coverage is always too slow to reach. The hashtag Eala German was trending in Germany within the hour. Filipino fan communities, already among the most organized and devoted supporter groups in women's tennis, had pushed the clip to a global audience within 90 minutes. The numbers climbed the way they only do when something needs no translation. When it clears every cultural and linguistic barrier and lands identically for every single person who encounters it. German fans described a strange, inseparable mixture of disbelief and pride. Filipino supporters wrote at length about what it means to watch someone carry your flag into spaces that weren't designed for you, and simply move through them like they belong because they do. Tennis journalists who normally resist anything that distracts from the actual competition shared it anyway, because certain moments simply override editorial judgment. One comment rose above everything else through sheer economy. She didn't have to do that. 7 words. The whole thing compressed. The most powerful gestures in human connection are almost always the unnecessary ones. The ones that cost nothing on a practical level but reveal everything about who a person actually is. Eala could have sat quietly for those 90 seconds. She could have stared at her strings. She could have done precisely what every other touring professional would have done. Treated the ball girl as part of the peripheral backdrop of competitive focus. Not unkindly. Simply professionally. Instead, she noticed a teenager doing an invisible job in her own language, and she met her there. In that language. On those terms. With no thought of an audience. What Steffi Graf's stillness actually meant, we have to talk about that expression on Steffi Graf's face, because it wasn't merely a reaction. It was a verdict. Graf didn't arrive at the top of her sport by chance. She built a legacy spanning 15 years through physical mastery, relentless mental discipline, and a competitive intensity that was almost something beyond human. 22 Grand Slams. The only player in the history of the sport, male or female, to win every major at least 4 times. 377 weeks ranked first in the world. She knows, more intimately than nearly anyone alive, what it costs to carry sport on your shoulders, to represent an entire country from a baseline, to be the person a nation watches with its collective breath held. Graf has witnessed extraordinary things across her decades in and around this game. Champions ascending and collapsing. Performances that will live in the record books as long as the sport exists. She is not someone who freezes easily. She is not someone given to visible, unguarded emotion in public, which is exactly why the footage of her during that changeover carries such weight. She froze completely. And what was on her face wasn't the gracious appreciation of a former champion acknowledging a talented young player. It was something older and deeper than appreciation. It was recognition. The kind that only surfaces when you've spent a lifetime at the absolute summit of something, and you see in someone else the quality that the vast majority of competitors never actually possess. The understanding that being exceptional at something is only half of what makes you genuinely matter. That the other half lives in how you treat the people around you, when treating them well earns you nothing. Graf spent her career as an ambassador for tennis almost involuntarily, through excellence, through discipline, through the sheer gravitational force of what she achieved. What she watched Eala do in those 30 seconds was something different entirely. She watched a 19-year-old choose connection over retreat, choose presence over preparation, choose to see someone invisible and make her visible, in front of 50,000 people without trying to. You cannot coach that. It wasn't on any curriculum in Manicure. That's character. And a woman who spent 377 weeks at the top of her sport knows character the instant it appears in front of her. She knows, better than anyone, that the scoreboard captures only part of the story. What it actually means. So what does any of this tell us? Not about the match, not about the tournament, but about the sport itself and what it might yet become. Women's tennis has always had a complicated, unresolved relationship with the question of belonging, whose story earns a spotlight, which faces appear on the advertising boards outside the major venues, which nations receive the kind of sustained investment in junior development that produces the next generation of champions. Eala's very presence in this sport is a quiet challenge to all of those questions. She came from a country that had never produced a Grand Slam champion. She trained at a program on a different continent. She learned languages that no one asked her to learn. She arrived in Berlin and spoke to a teenager in the teenager's native tongue, not as a statement, not as a calculated move, but as pure reflex, as an expression of who she simply is. And in doing so, she made 50,000 people feel something they hadn't arrived at a tennis venue expecting to feel.